For most of my life, I thought I knew history. You know, the story they tell you in those thick textbooks. Kings and queens, empires and revolutions, great thinkers and timeless art. But sitting in class year after year, this quiet, nagging feeling started to grow. None of those kings or queens looked like me. None of those empires were built by people who looked like me. In the story of history I was given, I was a footnote, if I was lucky. Most of the time, I wasn't there at all. I had no clue I was missing a huge part of my own story, a story that was vast, epic, and powerful. This is how finding the real history of Africa didn't just change my mind, it changed my life and helped me figure out who I really am. My journey didn't kick off with some big aha moment. It started with a quiet question that I just couldn't shake. Is this really it? The African history I was taught basically started with slavery, was defined by colonialism, and seemed to end with poverty and war. It felt like a story of constant victimhood, of a continent that always had history done to it, instead of being the one driving its own story. And I accepted it, because what else was I supposed to do? But that quiet question got louder. It pulled me down a rabbit hole of late night reading, online lectures, and documentaries, a journey to find the history that was hidden right in front of me. This is the story of how I went from a place of inherited shame to one of deep, unshakable pride. It's how I unlearned the history I was taught and finally found my own. The first revelation: we are all African. The first truth that hit me was the most basic one of all. The story of humanity starts in Africa. It sounds simple, but just let that sink in for a second. Every single person on this planet can trace their family tree back to Africa. This isn't a political talking point, it's a scientific fact. Africa is the cradle of humanity. And this cradle wasn't just sitting there empty. It was buzzing with innovation and culture long before many of the famous civilizations I learned about in school even got started. I learned about the Nok culture in what's now Nigeria, who were crafting these incredible terracotta sculptures around 1000 BCE. These weren't just pots, they were expressive, nearly life-size figures that are some of the earliest figurative art in the world. They show amazing artistic and technical skill, and around that same time, the Nok were also mastering iron smelting, creating the tools that helped their society thrive. Then I found the Kingdom of Kush in modern-day Sudan. This place was a powerhouse that not only rivaled its famous neighbor Egypt, but actually conquered it at one point, starting its own dynasty of pharaohs. Kush was a massive center for trade, connecting the Mediterranean with sub-Saharan Africa, a hub of incredible wealth built on gold and iron. And get this, they built over 200 pyramids, which is more than you can find in Egypt today. Each one a stunning piece of their unique architectural style. Learning this was like finding the first chapter of a book I never even knew existed. The story I'd been sold of a dark continent just waiting to be discovered wasn't just wrong, it was a deliberate lie of omission. This wasn't just black history, it was human history, and the foundation was laid in Africa. The second revelation: empires of gold in mind. Growing up, if you said the word empire, my brain would immediately picture Rome, Greece, or maybe Britain. I learned all about their philosophies, senates, and aqueducts, but Africa? The story I got was just tribal and primitive, so you can imagine how my mind was blown when I discovered the empires of West and Southern Africa. Civilizations whose wealth, knowledge, and organization were talked about all over the world. I'm talking about the Mali Empire, which in the 14th century was one of the largest empires on the planet. It controlled these huge trade routes across the Sahara, and its wealth was legendary. This was built on salt and most famously gold. In fact, at its peak, the Mali Empire was the source for a major share of the gold in the old world. Its most famous ruler, Mansa Musa, went on a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 that was so over the top, his spending of gold in Cairo actually contributed to a notable decline in the metal's value there. But this wasn't just about money. The empire's cities like Timbuktu became world-famous centers for learning and scholarship, with universities and massive libraries that pulled in intellectuals from all over the Islamic world. Then my journey took me south, to Great Zimbabwe. Here was a civilization that between the 11th and 15th centuries built this magnificent city of stone. It's one of the largest ancient stone structures south of the Sahara, The walls of his great enclosure were built with this incredible dry stone technique, no mortar to hold them together, and they rise up to 11 meters high. It's a marvel of engineering. This city was the heart of a huge trading empire, and archaeologists have found stuff from as far away as China and Persia there. Learning about these empires did something deep inside me. It completely replaced that old image of tribes and huts with stunning pictures of stone citadels and hubs of learning. It showed me that complex governments, international trade, and supporting the arts and education weren't just for Europe or Asia. It was part of my heritage too. This wasn't just a point of pride, it totally recalibrated my understanding of world history. The third revelation, the unbreakable spirit of resistance. The next part of my journey was without a doubt the hardest. The transatlantic slave trade and colonialism are brutal, painful histories to face, and the narrative I was taught usually just stopped there, leaving this feeling of finality, of total defeat. But as I dug deeper, I found a different story running right alongside the horror, an unstoppable story of resistance. The spirit of the people was never ever broken. This history wasn't passive, it was active, defiant, and it never stopped. I learned about revolts on the slave ships themselves, acts of unbelievable courage against impossible odds. One of the most incredible examples is the revolt on the ship Little George in 1730. Just 5 days after leaving the Guinea coast, 96 captured Africans, shackled and trapped, managed to break free. They took over the crew, and with zero modern navigational experience, they did the impossible. They turned that ship around and sailed it right back to Africa, back to freedom on the shores of Sierra Leone. They literally took their lives back. Stories like this are almost never in the textbooks, but they change everything. They shift the story from one of just victims to one of agency in a relentless fight for freedom. And that spirit of resistance didn't die out. It stood strong against the scramble for Africa when European powers just carved up the continent for themselves. While most of Africa was eventually colonized, there's the powerful story of Ethiopia. At the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a well-organized and well-armed Ethiopian army led by Emperor Menelik II completely defeated an invading Italian army. This victory sent shockwaves across the globe. It was a clear statement that Africa was not just there for the taking. Ethiopia kept its independence and became a beacon of hope, a symbol of African strength that would inspire freedom movements for generations. Finding this history didn't erase the pain of that era, but it put it in a new frame. It showed me a legacy not of weakness, but of incredible strength, resilience, and a refusal to be put out. The climax, a new identity. As I started piecing together these lost stories, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. That empty space, the one created by a history that didn't include me, started to fill up. It was being replaced by a timeline of innovators, kings, scholars, and freedom fighters. My identity was no longer anchored to the starting point of slavery. It was now rooted thousands of years deeper in a legacy of greatness. This new knowledge wasn't just about the past, it completely changed how I see the present and the future. I started to really get the words of Pan-African leaders, like a quote often attributed to Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, "I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me." He was talking about breaking down the artificial borders forced on them by colonialism and the need for African unity. That idea is still alive today, leading to things like the African Union and more recently the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is a massive project to create the largest free trade zone in the world, connecting 1.3 billion people with the goal of lifting millions out of poverty. I realized the story of Africa isn't finished. The same resilience I saw in the Little George revolt and at the Battle of Adwa is alive right now. You see it in the artists, the entrepreneurs, and the activists who are building the continent's future. You see it in the global African diaspora as more and more of us reconnect with our heritage and build a new global African identity. The shame that came from being told an incomplete story was gone, replaced by a deep sense of belonging. I am part of a long, unbroken line of people who have built, created, innovated, and fought back. The history I was taught in school was one where I simply didn't exist. The history I found for myself is one where my ancestors were at the very center of it all. It taught me that African history isn't some niche topic. It is world history. It's the story of where we all come from, of incredible empires, of unimaginable tragedy, and of triumphant resistance. It has changed not just what I think about the world, but who I am in it. It's given me an anchor, a foundation, and a sense of pride that no one can ever take away. This history doesn't belong on the sidelines. It belongs right in the heart of our shared human story. And if any of this resonates with you, if you've ever felt like a piece of your own history was missing, I really want to hear from you. Share your own experiences down in the comments. What did you learn about African history in school, and what have you discovered on your own? And if you want to join me on this journey of uncovering our hidden histories, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell for more. Thanks for watching.